Welcome. I'm Janice Roop Blaylock, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the Albany Civil Rights Institute Board of Directors and staff.
Mr. Jemal Omar Gibson has been called to teach, to speak, to serve, and to lead and to inspire. A man full of determination and resilience, Jemal is a talented author, a motivational speaker, a corporate executive, and a philanthropist. Jemal has spent the past 18 years in the pharmaceutical industry with companies like Pfizer, Davis, and currently as the commercial business director for AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals. He has managed billions of dollars in sales and received numerous accolades and awards over the years. Throughout his professional career, he has trained thousands of individuals on a variety of personal and professional leadership development strategies. He is a frequent panelist at Steve Harvey Essen Disney Dreamers Academy and has also spoken at countless workshops, schools, and public and private corporations including Kraft, AT&T, Volkswagen, and the National Sales Network. Jemal has been recognized as one of the most inspirational African-American executives and is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Martin Luther King Leadership Award, Florida A&M University's Distinguished Alumni Award. He also serves on the board of directors for the National Sales Network and Helping Hands Helping Others. His first book, Drugs, My Curse, My Savior, has received rave reviews, and Jemal has received a best-selling author award for its success. His second book, The Three Aspirations, With Them Anything is Possible, will be released in the fall. He was recognized as a feature author at the 2011 National Book Club Conference and presented alongside Walter Mosley and Judge Glenda Hatchett. Jemal resides in the suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife Lisa and three beautiful daughters, Iman, Zara, and Nadia. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Jemal O. Gibson.
Let me take this moment to thank Joy for inviting me down here, and certainly the board and all the staff for the Albany Civil Rights Institute. We met at Fox News not too long ago, and she reached out to me and said she'd love to have me down here, and we worked it out, and so I'm really grateful that you've got me here. So thank you. But let me also say that I believe what Maya Angelou once said, and it's really a beautiful just short phrase when you listen to it. I think you all can appreciate it. There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Right? No greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. So yes, I have the opportunity today to stand in front of you for 15, 20, 30 minutes to share part of my story. But I absolutely believe that many of you can come stand right up here in front and share your story too. And it would be just as encouraging and inspiring, right? So let me say this. Yes, I've written down a few things, but I tell my publicists and those guys, I hate being called a speaker, motivational speaker, and and teacher and coach and all of that, because I just want to share my story. That's the way I feel. It's like I'm just here to share my story. So I've written down some things, but I don't have this speech. So my discussion today is not going to be perfect. I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to split some verbs, right, for the teachers out there, so don't go back and talk about me. I'm going to say some ums and some ahs and what have you, because I'm just going to give you me, right? I'm just going to be the authentic me here today to share with you part of my life in hopes that they might bring some awareness, it might bring some encouragement, and some inspiration. Fair enough? Right. So let me share this. Obviously, Joy shared with you that I wrote a book, Drugs, My Curse, My Savior. So before I get into the My Curse and the My Savior, let me first talk about drugs, right? So it's really interesting. America has a long history with drugs, and I don't have enough time to start, right? Because it goes back to the Native Americans who were smoking a little something in the pipes, right? Which we all know, and then there's just a long history after that. But what's really interesting when you research it, right? And you see some of the westerns and the movies, and America was really smart about it because they didn't want to show the ugly side. But the cowboys just weren't bellied up over the bar because of drinking, right? There were opium dens and all of that, even when the cowboys were here. And that was brought over from the Chinese as they were expanding the railroad, right? And so it's really interesting. You've probably heard of the Opium Wars, right? There was 2 of them. And that's when Britain was forcing these Chinese people to take this opium that was coming from India. I mean, literally had wars over it. Killed them. you're going to make us, allow us to sell these drugs to your people. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? Literally. It's real, and there's a whole lot that goes on with that talks about trade, etc. So when the Chinese came here, they brought obviously some opium with them, and they started to expose Americans to opium at the time. So what's really interesting, right? People got hooked on opium, so then they developed morphine out of opium. And morphine was great, right? Because it helped with some of the pain, and you had the Civil War, and people were getting amputated right on the, on the field, and so morphine was helping with some of that, which was wonderful. So then you had some German pharmacist who developed heroin to help people get off the addiction for morphine, right? And obviously what happened to people who got to use heroin? They got addicted, right? And if you guys know and kind of follow a lot of the drug stuff now, right, we've got methadone, which they use to help people get off heroin, right, which is just another drug, but that's legal. But it's still kind of the same impact, same effect. So we've had this long history of drugs and a lot of other drugs that have come into play that have really crippled this nation. I talked about it this morning. When you look at the cost of drug abuse to this country, about $450 billion a year. And that was the estimate in 2005 by the New York Times. If you look at the NIH, National Institutes of Health, their figures are around the same, $468 billion because of the cost of drug abuse. Now let me put that in perspective. The cost of cancer to this country, and everybody's, right, understands the impact of cancer, about $170 billion. Diabetes. Anybody know anybody got diabetes in here? All right, almost everybody, $160 billion. So drugs is crippling our country, $450 billion a year due to the cost of drugs or drug abuse or drug centers or the child abuse because of drug use or incarceration or the loss of work and activity. I mean, it has crippled our community totally. Right? And so there's some conspiracy theories out there that my father once talked about, and I've done a lot of reading and research on it. I don't want to really say that I support the conspiracy theory, but I heard of some other ones that were true, which I ended up writing in the book, like Tuskegee experiment. That was once a conspiracy, which we then found out, hey, that really happened, right? And a lot of other things. You talk about Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. And so I put a little bit of history in the book as well. And I talk about my first experience here in Albany. Let me, as a matter of fact, I was telling the mayor this, right? Let me just take a quick second. So my first trip here to Albany, I was at Florida A&M University, and I came up with some folks might know this. There we go, all right? So I came up here with Tia Gordon and Walter Gordon. I met Walter when I got here, but that was Dr. Gordon's daughter, right? And I'm from Chicago. I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a second. But I grew up in the projects in Chicago. So I get out to Dr. Gordon's house, and it's this sprawling mansion, they got their own lake in the back. We're out fishing. They're like, well, you can sleep in the guest quarters. Like, the guest quarters? Are you kidding me? That's bigger than my apartment. So that was my experience like to black wealth. I'd never, ever, ever seen black wealth. Now you look at it on TV, the closest I got to it, even on TV, was the Jeffersons, right? And they lived in an apartment. But to live like that was just incredible to me. So that was my first trip to Albany. So sorry I I kind of went down that path. But just a quick story. So getting back to this whole thing about drugs, right? So 458 billion. So you think about the millions of people who've been impacted. How many of you in this room know anybody that's been impacted by drugs? Whether it's been somebody in your family, a friend, etc. Just by show of hands, right? So that's just about everybody. At this point now, almost everybody, especially in our community. And that was part of the conspiracy, and I'm going to stop here just kind of on the history of drugs, because they say that they allowed for opium to come into our communities in the 60s, right, to help diffuse, or heroin rather, to diffuse part of that Black Power movement. And then the same thing in the 80s. And what's really interesting is when you look in the 60s and you look at the rise of heroin in our communities, my father used to sell it. He'll tell you all day long. He'd sell it right in front of the police, as they would just sit right there. So not only did you see the rise in the use of heroin, but what went with that? Crime, right? What went with that? Incarceration, right? What went with that? A decrease in terms of education, a decrease in terms of a family unit. There's plenty of studies, there's plenty of data that can show you. She asked me if I wanted a PowerPoint. I would have showed you all that stuff. But trust me, drugs, you don't have to trust me. You know it, right? Drugs have destroyed our community. Right, so now let's fast forward a little bit, because I was one of the ones impacted by that. Me. So this is part of where my story is. You rewind the clock 44 years from today, and both my parents were addicted to heroin. Now, my father was a pimp, drug dealer, ex-con, turned drug user. And my mother, the same. Now, I just said that about my parents, right? My parents. So imagine saying that about your parents. Imagine what that life would have been like. All right? First story my father ever shared with me about his drug use. He said that my mother, and they used to get high every day, right? Several times a day, because heroin was one of those short-acting drugs, so they got high several times a day. We lived in a little small studio apartment separated just by beads, right? So in terms of their bedroom. So I could see the entire apartment. Taking care of me, that's right. That's why I love that, right? Now, if I was somewhere in Connecticut, they would have had me out, but down here in Georgia, my people. I used to watch them get high every day, every week, every month, months on end. So he said he came out of the little beaded area, and they had just finished getting high. And he saw me sitting there with a string wrapped around my arm and poking it with a pencil. I was one. Right? So this law of imagery is powerful. I often say that sometimes children are the creatures of their parents' habits. Right? It's this law of imagery. It's powerful. So you guys do this with me. You've probably done it, seen it before. If you have, just stay with me. Everybody take your right hand, stick it out in front of you like this. Right hand out in front of you like this. Now take that index finger and your thumb, put it together like that. Now I want you to turn it over like this. I've met a couple Alpha brothers in here. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm going to be over with this real quick. Right? So now I want you to take it and I want you to put it on your chin. Now, I want you to leave it where you have it. Now, where did I tell you to put it? And where do you have it? Yes. Yes, right? Okay. Okay, right? Where? Exactly. Now, I know that those of you who had it on your cheek ain't gonna tell, but I saw you. Anyway. But if you had it on your chin, because I know they gonna say, because I got it right? The chin. If you had it on your chin, raise your hand. Right? Raise it high, just so I can see. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know you had it on your cheek. You one of those students. I got it right. I'm sorry. I got it wrong too, just to make it if it feels any better. All right, so look, less than 10% of the room did what I said. The other 90% of the room, what? You did what I did. So it doesn't matter whether you were 1 and I was doing this, or if you're 16 or 15 or 31 or 41 or 51 or 61, you're still doing what you are kind of a creature of. What's part of your nature is this law of imagery. You're going to follow and do what others in front of you do. Now, who's wrong? Who was wrong in this situation? If you had it on your cheek, were you wrong?
No, because we followed you.
That's right. If you had it on your chin, were you wrong? No. Who was wrong? I was. That's right. You. You're absolutely right. I was wrong, right? Because I led you astray. And there are going to be people in your life, especially you young people, to know there are going to be people who lead you astray, right? And sometimes purposefully and sometimes unconsciously, right? And you've got to be able to figure the difference. That's why listening is so critically important. And knowing what the person is doing. Is that the right thing to do? My father used to tell me all the time, and this goes against the leadership culture of today, and you all have heard it. Do as I say, not as I do, right? Because just because that person can't embrace that principle and live it themselves doesn't mean that it's not right, right? So I say that to you, especially to the young folks over here. If you see an adult that's not doing the right thing, that doesn't give you the excuse to not do the right thing. It just means that they can't do it. Does that make sense? You guys with me on here? Because I'm going to keep coming back to y'all. I'm going to pick you out, stand you up, make you talk. All right? Good. So with that, that was one of my first experiences. Now, let me just do a quick chronological thing, right? So a little bit after one, my father was sent to jail for drugs. My mother was lost in the world of drugs. I went to live with my grandmother in the projects of Chicago called the Obla homes, right, on Roosevelt and Racine. These were some grimy projects, right? Extremely grimy. Every element of negativity was in these projects. By age 5, I'd seen my mother brutally beaten. You talk about imagery, that law, it's just there. It's just there, brutally, right? By my own family. My father had gotten out of jail and so went back to selling drugs. Everybody in the household that I was living in with my grandmother was drugs and alcohol, right? So my Uncle Eddie died of liver cirrhosis very early. My Uncle Bill had both his feet cut off. One leg at the knee, a little bit lower at the feet from gangrene, from living out in the streets because of drugs and alcohol. My Aunt Hannah got shot in the stomach, shotgun, from selling weed in the Cabrini Green projects when she was being robbed. My Uncle Dobie was sent to jail from selling drugs. He got caught and stealing. See, I can go on and on. Everybody in my family used drugs, sold drugs, went to jail for drugs, or died for drugs. That's the environment I was growing up in. Fast forward by 10, right? My mother was still relapsing back and forth on drugs. She recovered, she relapsed, she recovered, she relapsed. That was just the nature of that disease, right? My father had been shot, and I saw my brother use drugs for the first time. And he was 14. And I cried, literally, because I had seen the experiences of what was happening to our family. I don't know what made me that sensitive to it. Oh, I do, but I don't have time to go through it, but I was extremely sensitive to that, right? So fast forward to 16 now. I had gone to 11 different schools. I had lived with more than 6 families, several times back and forth, and I was completely lost, right? Completely lost. Like the millions of people who have been when drugs have impacted their families and their communities. How do you expect a child to grow up in that environment? Right? How do you expect them to make it? And we're facing that issue still right now today in many of our communities. How do you expect them to make it? It's a $458 billion problem. Right? So the government is not going to give $458 billion to counter that, to help solve it. Right? So a lot of people would ask me, because now I get to stand before you and I say this, with every bit of humility and gratefulness, that I stand before you at 44 by the grace of God, right? That's what Barack Obama would say is one of the top 1% earners in this country, and I deserve to pay more taxes, and I absolutely would if it would help programs and communities make a difference, especially for people who suffer, with drugs having impacted their lives. So I stand here today, right, just extremely blessed. So a lot of people would ask, well, how did you get here? Right? So let me take just a couple minutes to share with you these 3 inspirations. It's part of the next book. I've got it in this book, but this is what absolutely made a difference in my life. Right? They were called the 3 inspirations. And let me go back to when I was 16. My father gave me a book. My dad was a smart man, and I loved him dearly. He just made bad choices. And I'm going to take just a moment to just share a quick story that just happened. Mayor, just literally 20 minutes ago, a lady came into the building, and you could tell that she was on something and probably suffering from some type of substance abuse. And she had her 2 nephews and her son. This just happened 15, 20, 30 minutes ago. And she asked me, how much would the book cost? I said, it's $15. She said, well, will you take it 10? I said, well, sure I will. She said, well, let me go cash my check. I said, that's okay. So she sat and talked to me. She says, I'm looking at this book, and there must have been a reason God sent me in here today. God sent me in here today. She said, because I suffer from drug abuse. And she asked me this question. Did your parents love you? I say, yes, ma'am. They love me. That's what helped me get through a lot of what I went through. They couldn't give me anything, but they loved me. And I loved them. Regardless of what they were experiencing, I loved them. This lady called her nephews over and her son and said, y'all know I love you? Do you know that I love you? And then told them and asked them, you know I use drugs, right? And they were, yes, ma'am, but you know that I love you. This just happened. So this drug stuff is powerful of what it's doing to families. But what helped me get through a whole lot of it was just that one experience and just what I said. My parents loved me. My dad was smart. He just made a lot of bad decisions, right? A lot of bad decisions. But he gave me this book, A Road Less Traveled, right, by Scott Peck. Anybody ever heard of it? I love the book. At 16, I can't recall reading a book before 16. I'm as honest as good. And I know I did, right? I'm in school, right? I'm a junior in high school. I know I read some books. I can't tell you which one I read at all. I was just on pilot, right? I was on autopilot, just cruising along in life, just trying to get by, right? So I read this book, and this book talks about, delaying gratification and having some affirmations and aspirations and all of this positive stuff, right? And I'm like, wow, does this stuff work? And then I started reading more books by more people. And then my dad took me to church a couple times, and so I got introduced and started having this relationship with God, and then reading more books. And it was just incredible at that moment. It changed my life. So these things that I learned, I just want to share with you. I'm not 44 years old and going, okay, let me write a book and let me see what I did in my life and how did I get there? No. At 16, I started doing exactly what some of those things were saying to do. I'm going to share them with you, and I think you'll be surprised by it because it still surprises me today. So the first thing that I learned, right, was aspirations. And I'll just go through it real quickly. I'll do a whole 2-hour workshop on this. I'm going to give each one of these 5 minutes because I know I don't have the time. But aspirations, that's one of the first aspirations, which means you've got to have some goals, some dreams, some things, a purpose in life that's guiding you and moving you. Because as they say, right, there's a lot of books on purpose, purpose-driven you, purpose-driven me, purpose, lots of books on purpose. But what they're telling you is that a life without purpose is a life without meaning. And when you have some aspirations, some goals and some dreams and some desires, it helps give you a compass. It helps you make decisions. Now, I've been to Wharton School on decision making. I've done a whole bunch of stuff with all types of charts and, scattergrams, and you weight it and you rank it and you multiply it and all that. No, but this is what I learned very simply from that. If I have a dream or goal, I just ask myself 2 questions. This next decision I'm about to make, is it going to help me achieve my goal, or is it going to hurt me? It's just that simple, all right? Is it going to help me, or is it going to hurt me? And I can apply that to almost every decision that I have to make. And as a man, I realize the consequences, but sometimes I'm coming back over here to you guys, you may not realize the consequences, right? So not doing the homework assignment, is that going to help you or hurt you? You get to answer that really easily. It's going to hurt you, absolutely, right? If they want to go out and have a little fun and somebody's like, hey, we're going to smoke some cigarettes and we're going to smoke this, is that going to help you or hurt you, right? But you got to ask yourself that question, and when you do, it may help you in your decision making. But I've got a whole workshop that I love doing with kids. I don't have the time to do it now, but those 2 questions. Is it going to help you or hurt you achieve your goals or your dreams in life, whatever they may be, right? And that applies to all of us too, right? It applies to all of us. So that's the first aspiration. So what's really interesting about that aspiration is there's a book called What They Didn't Teach You at Harvard by this guy named McCormick, right? It's a great book. It was written in 1979. And so what he asked, this is Harvard. Right? This is the creme de la creme here in the U.S. So he asked these Harvard graduates, how many of you have goals? And 14% said they had goals. Then he said, well, how many of you have goals and a plan? Only 3% had goals and plans, right? Only 3%. So now that means what? 83% didn't have any goals or plans, and this is Harvard. So he comes back a few years later, and he connects with the people, does all his little research, etc. And what he finds is that the people who only had goals were 2 times more successful than those who didn't have goals at all. Just by having them. Just by having them. Just by having the goal in place, written down, they were 2 times more successful than those that didn't have them. Now here's what's interesting. The people who had goals and plans attached to those goals, they were 10 times more successful than those who had just goals, which meant they were 20 times more successful than those who didn't have goal or plan. And this is Harvard. So what I'm standing up here in front of you, this is not mumbo jumbo. This is not any, positive motivational speaking stuff. There are real tangible examples of what having goals and plans for those goals can do and change in your life. So those are aspirations. And it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're 15, how old are you, brother? 16. Whether you're 16, right, or you're 26, 36, 46, 66, having some goals helps give you purpose in your life to make a difference. So aspirations, that was the first inspiration. The second inspiration is perspiration. Right? Because you can sit all day long and dream all day long. As they will say in The Secret, John Assarath is a friend of my dad's who was one of the authors of The Secret along with Bob Proctor. And they will tell you in there all day, you can sit and dream all day long, but you've got to move your feet. Right? You've got to move your feet. Now, what's really interesting is when you develop these goals and these aspirations, something within you is going to tell you what you need to do. Now, you just have to follow, right? Now, and my spiritual self tells me that's God telling me to move my feet and to follow and to be in accord, right? So with that, that's the perspiration piece. Now, here's the beauty about perspiration, and this is what I love, right? Because there are some people who are coming into this world who have privilege. Sasha and Malia, Barack daughters, they ain't got to worry about a thing, right? They got some privilege. And there are a whole lot of people who are born to millionaires and billionaires, and their parents went to Harvard and Yale, and they've got some privilege and connections, right? And there are other people who are born who are just smart. Bill Gates is an example, right? Smart. IQ, he was brought into this world that way. And he leveraged that. But the thing that people can never take away from you, which is the beauty about perspiration, is no one can outwork you. It doesn't matter how much privilege they have. It doesn't matter how much money they have. They can not outwork you if you don't want them to. Which means if you move your feet and move them fast enough and hard enough and long enough, good things will happen. It will help you get to that, right? So that's the second inspiration. And an example of that really interesting is even after I read this stuff, I'm telling you folks, I'm 16, 17 years old. I had lived in 6 different homes. I'm carrying my stuff around in a plastic bag, right? Going from home to home to home. Sometimes I'm in a couple of homes during the same year. I mean, I went back and forth to these different homes, aunts, uncles, friends, other family, next door neighbors, left in a state by myself with the next door neighbor. Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you. Right? But I'm like believing in this stuff. All right, so I got my aspirations. I wrote them all down. This is what I want to do. I want to do this. I want to do this. And the book tells you got to change them to your aspirations to affirmations. Right? So you've got to affirm it. I'm not going to get too spiritual. I didn't come here to preach, but I just believe it says, I am that I am. Right? It says, knock and the door shall be, ask and you reap what you. I just started living by those principles, right? And that gave me the belief to know that if I wrote this down and if I believed in it, it would happen, right? So those were my affirmations. So lastly, I'll get to inspiration. And that's the third inspiration, is inspiration. Because we all what? We all run into a wall, a brick. I mean, some of these folks can tell me, right? You done hit some walls, some mountains, and it's knocked you on your butt. And sometimes made you not want to get up, right? But they say inspiration comes in 3 ways, right? So the first way that inspiration comes is it's intestinal. There's something inside of you that's driving you and moving you. It could be innate. You could be born with it. It's just moving you. It could be spirit, what have you, just moving you to move forward and continue to press on. It's intestinal. The second way that inspiration comes is from people, right? So whether it's a parent, if you've got children, you've had the worst day in your life at work, but you come home and look at your kids and you go, what? That's what it's for, right? That's what I'm doing this for. And they give you that inspiration to go back out at it again, because now you know you're doing something for them. Or if you're a child, like with me, right? When I was younger and after we had lived in a basement apartment, I think the window in that apartment was this big. And we had 3 of them. Those were the only windows I had in my entire basement apartment building. And you know, somebody came in there and robbed us and took everything we had? Right? I'm like, you really ain't getting nothing, brother. But they just took everything we had. The little bit we had in a studio basement apartment on the west side of Chicago. But you know what? That gave me some inspiration to say, I'm going to get my mama out of here. You know, I'm going to get my mother out of here. I'm going to get my baby sister out of here because I don't want to ever have anybody take anything away from us like that. So you use that inspiration, especially for you all, as fuel to fire you to move forward and do whatever it takes to be successful, right? The last one comes from things, or what they say, things or places, right? So it's either people. This is great, you know. Especially I've done some stuff at some of the prisons and things like that. And I'm like, you know, telling some of them brothers, y'all don't want to come back here, right? This is the thing that's motivating you to not come back here. Or it could be a certain neighborhood that you came from, or it could be a place that you want to go to. Any of you seen a beautiful home and you're like, you're just holding it. That's what I want. That's where I want to go. That's what I want to have. That's where I want to live. And you hold that, and that gives you inspiration toward moving toward that. So people don't always move away from things that are bad. They move toward things that are good. So we're motivated in 2 different ways, either away from something bad or toward something good. And you just have to figure out how you're wired. And if you're trying to inspire, encourage other people, you have to figure out how they're wired. And that's what you use. Make sense? So let me share this story with you as I get ready to close about inspiration. And this is the one that really helped me understand this principle of inspiration. So now I'm living in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm selling. I'm the manager. I've got a big geography, like almost the state of Ohio. I've got a lot of people working for me. And my brother at the time was selling drugs. Illegal drugs. So we're selling drugs at the same time. Except he's killing people and I'm helping people live healthier, happier lives, right? But my brother would tell me, man, you the real Nino Brown, right? You the real deal. And we would laugh at that, you know, and it wasn't funny, but it was funny. You know, it just was. But so I'm in Youngstown, Ohio, and I'm with one of my sales reps. And we just did a $1 million account. She did a great job, and I'm congratulating her. You know, Michelle, you did an incredible job. I'm really proud of you. You know, you just were awesome today, right? And so I leave out of that. I'm going back to Cleveland. It's a 2-hour drive. I didn't get out of the parking lot. I get a call, and it's like, and I'm like, hello? And the voice says, Jemal? And I said, hey, yeah, it's Jemal. I said, who's this? He said, it's Henry. I said, hey, Henry, how you doing? He says, I'm good. He says, Sam's dead. And I said, Sam who? He said, Sam. And I said, Sam who? And he said, your father. Sam. And I don't know if any of you have ever gotten a call like that. It just knocks you off your feet, especially if it's somebody that you love, that's just dear to you. I mean, it consumes you. And so we have this discussion. I'm in total disbelief, but so my dad had died, and he had been in a morgue for a day or 2, and that was the first call I got. And my dad had died of a drug overdose. Now, he had been clean for 12 years, relapsed, and in 3 months, he was dead. I told you guys earlier, I loved my dad, even though he made a lot of mistakes, but I loved him. I was forgiving, right? I knew that what he and my mother was doing and what was happening to their life was hurting them more than it would ever hurt me. And I loved them instead. I'd always said that if my dad wasn't here, I didn't want to be here. Because quite frankly, he was helping to usher me out of where I was coming from. I truly felt that God had sent my dad to me to help me get out. right? And if he wasn't going to be here, I wasn't going to be here. Everybody knew this about me. I would say it jokingly in passing, and everybody knew that. So my dad dies 2 weeks before my wedding. And he was my best man, right? So I tell my fiance then, Lisa, my wife now, I said, well, you plan it. You do what you need to do. I'm going to the mountains. And I left. I went to the mountains. There was this mountain range in New York area called World's End. And I just felt that that's where my world was going to end. I specifically found this mountain range. And that's where I went. All of my stuff, 9mm, and I was gone. So I'm sitting out one of the days, and it's really interesting. I just packed up my stuff and had my rucksack on, and I go out to this little area, and they had like a little pew, and you could tell it was like a little outdoor chapel with a couple of bleachers and a little creek behind it, right? And I sit in one of the bleachers, and I pull the 9mm out, and I sit it on my lap. And I start having this conversation in my head, right? And, you know, the first thing is, you know, you don't want to do this. And I don't know if it was God talking to me, if it was my dad, or if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but this was the conversation, right? It was, you don't want to do this. And I was like, yes, I do. I'm tired. I'm really, really tired, right? Because what I didn't share with you all in part of that journey was along that way, I had been shot and stabbed and robbed and beaten and abused in many different, I've had a journey. And to make it from that, I was tired. I had done all that I could do. And then the voice was like, well, what about your mother? I said, you know what, I'm gonna leave her some money and she'll be fine. And your sister, I'm gonna leave her some money and she'll be fine. What about your wife to be? She'll find somebody else. That's what they always do. But the part that got to me was I had a daughter at that time with my fiance, and she was 3. And he said, what about your daughter? And even still, this is this thing, folks, when you hit that wall, you will rationalize. Even still, I said, she will be okay. She's only 3. She won't remember me. But I don't want to go 30, 40 more years without my dad. And then it came back to me and said, so you would deprive her of the love that you have for your dad, for her to have that love for you. And that's what saved me. That was my inspiration at that moment. Otherwise, I don't think I would be here today. I would be another casualty of drugs, but in a different way, the way it impacts our community with depression and sorrow and sadness. It impacts us, right? But I'm here today. Again, by the grace of God, I am here today. Not long after my father died, my brother died of a drug overdose. And then my mother died. So I just felt like, man, you know, I'm left here. You know, with these folks, I'm doing this stuff and it just happens to be drugs and they just happen to be legal, but I can't pull everybody out fast enough. I can't get them fast enough. But holding on to that inspiration. So I just share with you all that, yeah, I got that far. Everybody doesn't get that far. We know a lot of people do, right? Because we know some people that probably have maybe taken their life because they didn't have that piece of inspiration to help them connect to a reason to stay alive. That now I've used a temporary problem and created a permanent solution, right? So that inspiration, so that's the piece that I share with you all, that you've got to have these cornerstones of inspiration in your life. No matter how big, no matter how small that wall may be, you've got to be connected to that thing that inspires you, and to be able to know what it is. So when you hit the wall, you can reach out to it, reflect back on it, grab it, touch it, move it, call them, do whatever, but that's the thing that will help move you. And that's what has helped me continue to go on at this point. So here's where I am, right? So I started off with this thing about what would you do if you could not fail? And what's really interesting is I always consider myself, I'm just a little project boy, right? Just a little project boy born with heroin running through my veins, and here I get to stand today. Having sold billions of dollars of drugs and made millions of dollars in the process, but I get to stand here today to share this story to help encourage and inspire other people that anything is possible. And it's not about me now, right? It took a lot of courage for me to write this story, because I knew the corporation was going to be like, whoo, yeah, well, this brother, he really is a brother. Right. He had us fooled for a little bit, but no, he really come from the hood. So I got a little nervous, because I didn't want them to now take that and put that on me and use what they thought my life was and make that a part of what my character was about. So I almost didn't write it. And that's why Les Brown, who did the foreword, who just encouraged me that you got to do it. Because people can take drugs off of this title, right? It doesn't take drugs off. Everybody's got something that you feel like that's cursing you. And what's really interesting is God has a funny sense of humor. That very same thing could be your savior, right? If you look deep enough. So it's not about me. So what would you do if you could not fail? I wrote my affirmations. I've been writing them since I was 17, right? Every single thing that I put on my affirmations list to this day has come true. Every single one of them. Now I can show some of the papers. I let the folks test the ink and the writing. So this is like literally everything that I've written, except what I have now, right, that I'm working, has come true. That's 27 years. Now these things are totally different, folks, right? So one, I wanted to go to college. There's a great story in there about how I left Chicago with $40 to go to Chicago, right? Landed in Tallahassee with only $20. I thought I was going to the beach to go to school, and I'm like, ain't no beach around here in Tallahassee, right? But I get there with nothing, no financial aid, nothing. But I went out on faith. I wrote it down and said, that's what you got to do. Right? I've been an author, which I wanted to do. I'm an inventor. I wanted to say, heck, I want to invent something. I got an idea. So I wrote it on my I am list. I am an inventor. And you guys can Google it. You'll see there's some invention there. I've had some other businesses. I was a systems engineer while I was in college, working for Apple Computer. At that time, trying to help my school out, with some of their technical things, totally different. Went into the Army, did special forces and all of that stuff. I didn't know. All of these things were totally different. They have nothing to do with each other. Systems engineer, marketing, business, author, engineer, inventor, nothing to do with each other. Except I wrote it on a sheet of paper. That's it. So I'm sharing with you whatever aspirations that you have, turn them into affirmations. I am, ... and believe me, anything is possible. All right? Thank you very much, you all. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You need this?